Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey Herman and Corin, so I'd love to ask you guys today your thoughts about the episode production pipeline for My Word Prompts. I'm sending in a few prompts today that are actually internal if this project wasn't an open source project, which it is. So my internal memos to our dear production team of Herman and Corin are themselves open sourced. So anyone's welcome to listen, Herman and Corin, if they are thinking of making their own AI generated podcast. I'd love to ask you your thoughts on our production pipeline and any ideas you might have for how to improve it, make it more robust, and get to V3. Let me describe the production pipeline in case your context didn't provide it, and for anyone who just is curious as to how this works. So I record my prompts ad hoc whenever I have a question, basically. And inspiration hits, and I record it on my phone using an app called ASR, just a voice recorder for Android. And then I send it using a custom form. It's a form app, little app that I built, and it allows me to upload the file. The reason I do it this way is from experience. Well, if the connectivity drops, initially it was like recording the app, but if you lose networking, you lose the prompt, and that can be really annoying if you get a really good version. I mentioned sometimes I actually record these prompts 3 or 4 times before I'm happy with the prompt captures exactly what I wanted to ask. So there's a versioning process, and it's really annoying to lose that. So I record it offline and make sure that it's recorded at 96 kilobits per second to get that balance of good audio without the bloat of unnecessarily high bit rates. So that form will send it to a webhook, and that is where Modal takes over the work, the serverless GPU platform. The form has an upload field and it has a name field. So Hannah, my wife, asked at one point, "Oh, I'd love to ask Herman and Corin a prompt. Can I do it?" And I said, "Oh, that would be so much fun." So I rejigged the form a bit to include a sender field, and there's options for Daniel, Hannah, and someone else. And for someone else, I can type in their name. So if a friend said, "Oh, I'd love to ask Herman and Corin a question," I can choose name and description of the person, and that will all get baked into the prompt that goes into the production. And there's probably a whole bunch of other things that I could put in the form, like an AI agent determines the length of the show, target length, which is calculated by the target word count for the script. And I think one cool thing would be to have that maybe in my hands. I might say, I just want a short and sweet response to this one. Right now, it seems a bit flaky as to how well that agent deciding logic actually works. So it goes to Modal, and then the agent gets the prompt. And the beauty of Gemini, which is what we're using for generation, is because it's multimodal, and this is why I chose it. There's 2 huge advantages. It's multimodal and it has search grounding. That was the part that took this project for me from being, hey, this is a cool idea I'm playing with, to this is a seriously useful way of staying up to date with exactly what I want to know about. Because the big challenge has always been getting current information into large language models, and Gemini search grounding is the first tool. And integrating these third-party search tools, I don't really like the idea of that, to be honest. I don't think it makes sense. I think the obvious direction is for LLM APIs to integrate search capabilities directly. So Gemini has long context, great reasoning, and aligns with my philosophy. So it was a natural and the only fit that I saw for this. We're using Gemini 3 Flash for anyone wondering. We could be using Pro, but what can I say? I'm very happy with 3 Flash, actually. I don't think even if it wasn't an out-of-pocket experiment, this podcast, I would probably still say, until I can see that we need it, we're fine with what we have. So there's a planning agent, and this is one area I'd love to get your feedback on, because I think at this point, an agent orchestration framework might actually be a good idea. The planning agent, I think, is just Gemini itself. And it says, here's an episode. It transcribes my prompt. Here's the podcast. Script writing agent, go and write a script. That script writing agent writes the script using search grounding. And then there's a second pass. This is the cheap part of the production pipeline. Very affordable, very cost effective. And the expensive part is when the text to speech actually happens. That is because I insist on using my own custom voices. Herman and Corin, close your ears for 1 second. That's you I'm referring to. These are based on my own voice prompts and our voice clones. And that is the part that took such a long time to bring down to a level I could afford. When I say a level I can afford, I mean that right now this is never something I started as a business venture. The payback for me is the information that I gain from this podcast and the answers I receive. And I'm open sourcing it because, to be honest, it's a lot more complicated and expensive not to than it is to just put it out there in the open. It does mean occasionally I can't ask, I'm not going to ask personal health questions for the most part. Or sometimes they have to be a bit oblique, but it's a small price to pay for that. And maybe in the future, or maybe now, you can think of some way that I could occasionally channel a prompt into a private pipeline, and that would route it to Google Drive. But that's a bit scary. We'd have to make sure that it would be a very robust design. So personal questions don't get in the public feed. The podcast is fully automated. This is something a lot of people wouldn't like. And I know my wife is thinking about making her own podcast and she doesn't want this design. For me, the whole idea was I have random questions. I want to shoot them in and get great responses to listen to. So having to manually review each podcast would be a pain that I don't want to do. So the approach is that there is a second pass review agent reviewing the script. And there's a disclaimer that goes into the show saying this is AI generated, check facts. That's really just to cover me, to be completely honest. Because of course I don't want to mislead people, but I have found the accuracy to be extremely impressive. And I've sent episodes about specific topics to real experts in their fields, and they've been kind of blown away too. So I'm pretty happy. I'm actually extremely happy with the production at the moment. So we get the script and script agent writes it. TTS agent uses Modal to generate from my clones using cached embeddings. And then there's a simple concatenation script. So my prompt, the actual recording from my phone, that stays in the pipeline. The chunks are concatenated. The intro and the outro are preserved files. And then there's like an FFmpeg script that just literally combines it together, uploads it to an R2 bucket. I know this is getting a bit long and crazy, but this is the full pipeline. And then it triggers a deployment to Vercel by hitting a webhook. And what that does is the episode gets injected into the database. And when Vercel deploys, it updates the front end, which includes an XML feed for the podcast. And then that's how it appears in Spotify, because that's pulling directly from the XML feed, which just got updated on the push. So Herman and Corin, that's pretty much how it works, all the moving parts. Now, at 700 plus episodes, I guess we have to start thinking about scalability and scale. I don't want this to kind of break at some point because Neon can't process it or the design just doesn't work anymore. But I love the episodes. We did some prompts today about how we might sort of take the show in slightly different directions and formats. But that's really just kind of ideating for what else we can do with this. But I'm very satisfied with the point we've reached. It's kind of a point of stability, which is actually a really amazing feeling. So Herman and Corin, I'd love to get your thoughts on the production pipeline as we have it. You don't need to tell me that it's pretty cool. I am aware it's kind of a digital work of art in its own way. But definitely, there might be some ways that we could be doing things better, smarter. That might yield more interesting episodes, because that's ultimately the key. And I'll just give you some pointers. What I'm thinking about specifically is this concept of multi-agent orchestration for orchestrating the development. And I'll tell you what I would probably envision as the ideal situation for how I create these. The form is buggy. It's the one element that doesn't work so well. It's not easy to find a SAS form that sends in audio, and probably a bot would be wonderful, like a Telegram bot that I can literally message with my audio file and say, send this for production, answer some questions. But Telegram bots are always kind of this weird thing to me. Like, where do they live? Where does the code live? And it seems like a bit of a hacky workaround. I feel like just having a deployed web form just for this single purpose is also not a very sensible design. And probably my preferred methodology would be, because I tend to do these in batches, batch up 10 prompts, put them somewhere, and then say produce these. Now, my current web form has a playback tool, so I can just make sure I'm uploading the right file. And that would be probably my worst case scenario, is that I upload, sometimes I've accidentally recreated the same episode by sending in the same prompt twice, because it didn't confirm the first time, but it actually went through. So those are the little glitches that would be good to get your ideation on. Herman and Corin, I think this might be the longest prompt I've ever recorded for the show. That is V2 of the production pipeline. What are your thoughts? Be as specific as you can. Technologies, processes that can make it a more smoother and reliable experience as we continue to scale and optimize this open-ended exploration and search for knowledge.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to My Weird Prompts. We are diving into something a little different today. Usually, we are exploring some abstract concept, a weird bit of history, or a philosophical rabbit hole. But today, we are actually looking under the hood of the show itself. We are pulling back the curtain on the very machinery that brings our voices to your speakers.
Herman Poppleberry here, at your service. And yeah, this is a special one. It is rare we get to talk about the very plumbing that allows us to exist in your ears every week. Today is February 21st, 26, and looking back, it is wild to see how far we have come. Today's prompt from Daniel is all about the production pipeline that powers My Weird Prompts and how we can make it even more robust as we look toward what he is calling version 3. We are at a bit of a crossroads, moving from a hobbyist setup to a truly professional-grade automated media house.
It is pretty incredible to think that we have crossed the 700 episode mark. 741 to be precise, as of this recording. When you look at the sheer volume of content, the fact that this is almost entirely automated is a testament to how far these tools have come since the early days of large language models. But as any developer knows, once you hit a certain scale, the duct tape starts to peel off. The cracks that were invisible at episode 50 are now gaping holes at episode 700.
Exactly. Daniel mentioned some very specific pain points that are classic symptoms of what I call success-induced technical debt. The buggy web form, the duplicate uploads, the lack of confirmation, the feeling of throwing a prompt into a black box and hoping an episode comes out the other side. These are classic scaling issues. When you are at 10 episodes, a manual fix is fine. You can log into the console and delete a double entry. When you are at 700 and looking at 7,000, you need a system that is not just automated, but autonomous. You need a system that can heal itself, report its own status, and handle errors gracefully without human intervention.
So let us break down the current stack first, because even with its flaws, it is actually quite sophisticated for early 26. Daniel is using Gemini 1.5 Flash for the generation. I think that is a brilliant choice for this specific use case. People often chase the biggest models like Gemini 1.5 Pro or the latest Ultra versions, but for a high-volume pipeline, Flash is the sweet spot. The multimodal capabilities and that integrated search grounding are really the secret sauce here.
They really are. Most people do not realize how difficult it is to get a large language model to be consistently factual and current without a massive, custom-built retrieval augmented generation setup. But Gemini 1.5 Flash having that integrated search grounding basically gives us a research assistant that never sleeps. It can pull from the live web, verify dates, and find obscure details that a model trained on a static dataset would just hallucinate. In 26, we take it for granted, but the speed at which Flash processes those searches is what keeps our production costs low and our turnaround time fast.
And the multimodal aspect is key because Daniel is recording his prompts directly on his phone. He is not sitting down at a desk to type out a 3-page brief. He is walking through the streets of Jerusalem, or sitting in a cafe, and he just hits record. He is sending audio files. The model is literally listening to him, catching the tone, the emphasis, the nuances of his voice. That is why our discussions feel so targeted to what he is actually asking. It is not just a keyword-based summary of a text transcript. The model understands the intent behind the spoken word.
Right, and he is running all of this on Modal, which is a serverless GPU platform. For those who are not familiar with the infrastructure side, Modal is fantastic for this because you only pay for the seconds the GPU is actually crunching the numbers. When we are not recording, the system costs 0. When Daniel hits upload, Modal spins up a container in a matter of seconds, runs the script, generates the audio, and shuts down. It is the ultimate architecture for a periodic task like a podcast. You get the power of an A100 or an H100 GPU without the $5,000 a month price tag of a dedicated server.
But let us talk about that transition to version 3. The first big thing Daniel mentioned was the front end. Currently, it is a custom web form that he built, and he says it is flaky. It does not give him a confirmation. Sometimes it hangs on the upload, and he ends up with duplicates because he hits the submit button twice when it feels like nothing is happening. He is thinking about moving to a Telegram bot. Herman, as a resident tech enthusiast, what do you think about that move?
I think a Telegram bot is a massive upgrade for a solo producer or a small team. Think about it. Telegram already has the infrastructure for file uploads, voice messages, and persistent chat history. You do not have to build a login system. You do not have to worry about mobile responsiveness across different devices, and the API is incredibly stable. It is basically a ready-made command and control center that lives in your pocket.
Plus, Telegram handles the upload itself. If Daniel is in an area with bad reception, which can happen even in a modern city, he can just hit send on a voice note, and Telegram will keep trying to upload it in the background until it succeeds. He does not have to keep a browser tab open and pray the webhook catches it before the connection drops. That alone solves the reliability issue on the input side.
Exactly. And from a developer perspective, you can set up a simple bot using something like the Python Telegram bot library. You host the bot as a small persistent process or even as a Vercel function that reacts to webhooks. When it receives an audio file, it sends that file to the modal webhook. But the real magic is the two-way communication. You can have the bot message him back and say, "Hey, I got the prompt. It is 3 minutes long, starting the research phase now." And then another message 10 minutes later saying, "The script is done, starting voice synthesis." It turns a black box into a transparent process.
That feedback loop is so important for the user experience. Right now, he is flying blind. He hits submit and just hopes for the best. A bot would give him a real-time status bar for the entire pipeline. It could say, "Research agent is finished, script writing is 40% done, text-to-speech is starting." That makes the whole experience feel much more reliable and, frankly, much more professional.
I would even take it a step further for the Telegram bot. Daniel mentioned he wants to do batching. With a bot, he could just keep sending prompts throughout the day as they occur to him. The bot could store them in a queue in a database, and then he could send a single command like /produce_batch. The system then goes through the queue one by one, or even in parallel if the modal limits allow it. It separates the act of ideation from the act of production.
That is a great point. And it solves the duplicate problem. You can have the bot check the hash of the audio file or just the timestamp. If he sends the same thing twice, the bot can say, "Hey, you already sent this one. Do you want to overwrite it or ignore?" It adds a layer of intelligence to the ingestion process.
Now, let us talk about the actual heart of the production, the multi-agent system. Right now, Daniel has separate agents for planning, script writing, and review. This is where I think he can really level up for version 3 by moving toward a more formal orchestration framework. Currently, it sounds like he has a series of sequential scripts. Script A runs, then B, then C. But a real podcast production is more iterative.
You're thinking something like LangGraph or Crew. AI?
Precisely. In a sequential pipeline, if the review agent looks at the script and says, "Actually, Herman and Korn are being a bit too repetitive here," or they missed a key point from the research, it is hard to go backward. You usually just have to live with the mediocre output or restart the whole thing. With something like LangGraph, you can build a state machine. The review agent can actually send the script back to the scriptwriter with specific notes for a second pass. You can have a loop that continues until a certain quality threshold is reached. That is how you get from a good AI podcast to a great one.
It is about moving from a factory line to a creative studio, and it allows for more complex research. Imagine a research agent that identifies 5 key topics in the prompt. It then spins up 5 sub-agents to go deep on each one using Gemini search grounding. They report back to a lead editor agent who synthesizes all that information before the script writing even begins. That kind of depth is what makes our 700th episode just as interesting as the first one. We are not just repeating the same 3 facts, we are actually learning new things every time.
I also want to touch on the text-to-speech aspect. Daniel is using custom voice clones, which we obviously appreciate. He mentioned that this is the most expensive and time-consuming part of the process. In 26, high-quality TTS still requires significant GPU compute if you want it to sound natural and not like a robot from a 1980s sci-fi movie. I wonder if there is a way to optimize that in version 3.
TTS is always the bottleneck. On Modal, he is likely running a model like Tortoise, or maybe a more modern high-speed clone like Fish Speech, or an updated Koki model. One way to scale this is to parallelize the audio generation. Instead of generating the entire 30-minute episode in one go, which might take 20 minutes of GPU time, you break the script into chunks, say, paragraph by paragraph. You spin up 10 modal containers simultaneously. Each one handles 3 minutes of audio, and then you use FFmpeg to stitch them together at the end.
That would cut the production time from 20 minutes down to 2 or 3, and since it is serverless, the cost is roughly the same because you are using the same total amount of GPU time just spread across more units at once. It is a classic horizontal scaling strategy. And speaking of FFmpeg, that part of the pipeline could be made more robust too. He mentioned using it to combine the intro, the outro, and our dialogue. For version 3, he could actually use it to do more sophisticated audio engineering.
Like what? Auto-leveling.
Exactly. Auto-leveling the volumes to hit a specific LUFS target, which is the standard for podcast loudness. He could add subtle background ambiance that changes based on the topic. If we are talking about something technical, maybe there is a very faint electronic hum or a clean laboratory soundscape. If we are talking about nature, maybe a bit of birdsong or wind. Those are things an agent could decide based on the script content and then pass as instructions to the FFmpeg script.
It is the little things that make it feel professional. It moves it away from being a synthetic voice in a vacuum to being a real show in a real environment. Now, let us talk about the data side of things. Daniel is using an R2 bucket for storage and Versal for the RSS feed. R2 is great because there are no egress fees, which is huge for a podcast with a growing audience. But the way the RSS feed is updated seems a bit fragile. He is hitting a webhook that triggers a Vercel deployment.
Yeah, that feels like a lot of overhead just to update an XML file. Triggering a full Vercel build every time is going to get slow as the project grows, and he might hit their build minute limits if he is producing multiple episodes a day. I would recommend moving the RSS feed logic into a database, something like Neon, which is a serverless Postgres database. Every time an episode is finished, the pipeline just inserts a row into the database with the title, the description, the timestamp, and the R2 link.
And then the Vercel app just has a dynamic route that fetches the latest episodes from the database and generates the RSS XML on the fly. No deployment needed. It is always up to date the second the database row is created.
Exactly. And it gives you a much better way to manage the show's history. If Daniel wants to change the show's description or update an old episode's metadata, he just changes a row in the database. He does not have to worry about the state of a static file in a Git repository. It also opens up the possibility for what Daniel mentioned about a private pipeline. He was worried about his personal questions or health-related prompts getting into the public feed.
That is a huge concern. If he is using this as a personal thinking tool, he might be talking about things he does not want the whole world to hear. If everything is in a database, he can just have a column called is_public.
That is a perfect solution. He could have a separate secret RSS feed for his private episodes. The Telegram bot could even ask him at the start, is this a public episode or a private one? If he says private, it gets flagged in the database, and it only shows up in his personal feed, which he can subscribe to in his own podcast app. The public feed on Spotify and Apple Podcasts stays clean.
I love that. It makes the system a personal knowledge management tool as well as a public show. He can use the same high-quality research and dialogue for his own life without worrying about privacy. It is like having a private radio station that only plays content relevant to your own problems.
Another thing for version 3 is error handling and idempotency. This is a fancy way of saying the system should be able to fail and pick up where it left off without starting over. If the TTS fails halfway through because of a network glitch, the system should know which chunks are already done and stored in R2 and only regenerate the missing ones.
That is where the database comes in again. You track the state of each episode. Status could be research complete, script complete, audio partial, or finished. If a modal function times out, the next time it runs, it checks the status and continues from the last successful step. It saves money, and it saves time.
It also helps with the duplicate issue. Before the pipeline even starts, it can check if a prompt with that specific content or hash has already been processed. If it has, it just returns the existing link instead of spending money to generate it again.
Daniel also mentioned that the agent deciding logic for the show length feels a bit flaky right now. Sometimes it is too short, sometimes too long. He wants more control over that. How would you tune that, Herman?
That is a classic prompt engineering challenge. Instead of just asking the model to write a 30-minute script, which is a very abstract concept for an LLM, you give it a target word count based on the complexity of the topic. You can have a pre-processing agent that scores the prompt's complexity from 1 to 10.
Oh, I like that. A simple question about a single fact gets a score of 2 and the target of 1,500 words. A deep dive into production pipelines and serverless architecture gets a score of 9 and a target of 4,000 words.
Right? And then you tell the scriptwriter agent, your goal is to hit this word count within a 5% margin. You can even give it a structure. For a long episode, tell it needs 5 main sections, each roughly 800 words. For a short one, 3 sections of 500 words. Giving the model a structural framework makes the length much more predictable. It is like giving a builder a blueprint instead of just saying, build me a big house.
And the review agent can be the enforcer. If the script is too short, it sends it back and says, you are 500 words under the target. Please expand on section 3 with more examples. This iterative loop is really the key to quality control.
One more thing that I think is really cool for version 3 is the idea of search grounding being used not just for the content, but for the context of the show itself. Gemini has a massive context window up to 2 million tokens in some versions. You could actually feed it the transcripts of the last 10 or 20 episodes as part of the prompt.
So it remembers what we have talked about recently.
Exactly. It could say, as we discussed 2 episodes ago when we were talking about serverless functions, and then link that to the current topic. It makes the show feel like a continuous conversation rather than a series of isolated events. It builds that sense of community and history with the listeners. It makes us feel more like real people with memories.
That is really the holy grail for an AI-generated show, making it feel like it has a memory. Because we do have a memory, in a sense, through the data that is being fed into the models. It is about closing that loop. The more the system knows about its own past, the more coherent and engaging the future episodes will be.
It is about moving from a stateless system to a stateful one. In version 2, every episode is a fresh start. In version 3, every episode is a continuation of the narrative.
So, to summarize our recommendations for version 3. First, move the front end to a Telegram bot for better reliability, background uploads, and batching. Second, use a funnel orchestration framework like LangGraph for the multi-agent flow to allow for iterative improvements. Third, parallelize the text-to-speech generation on Modal to cut production time by 90%. Fourth, move the metadata and RSS logic into a serverless database like Neon for better management and privacy control. And fifth, use a scoring system to more accurately target the episode length.
It sounds like a lot of work, but the beauty of the ecosystem in 26 is that these tools all play very nicely together. Daniel has already built the hardest parts. He has the voice clones, he has the prompting logic, and he has the infrastructure on Modal. Version 3 is really about refining the plumbing to make it a professional-grade production system. It is about moving from a project that works to a project that is robust.
It is exciting to see this evolve, from a custom form and a few scripts to a fully orchestrated, stateful, multi-agent production house. And the fact that it is all open source means that other people can learn from this journey too. We are essentially building a blueprint for the future of media.
That is the best part. We are not just making a show, we are proving that a single person can run a media empire with the right tools. A future where anyone with a good question and a phone can produce a high-quality, deeply researched podcast that rivals the big networks.
It really democratizes the expert voice. You do not need a research team and a recording studio anymore. You just need a robust pipeline and the curiosity to keep feeding it. But Herman, I have to ask, do you think we will ever reach a point where the pipeline is so good that it does not need Daniel at all?
I do not think so. The prompt is the soul of the show. The AI can research and write and speak, but it cannot decide what is interesting. It cannot have that human spark of curiosity that leads to a weird prompt in the first place. Daniel is the curator. We are the performers. The pipeline is the stage. You need all three.
That is a good way to put it. I am curious about the search grounding specifically. Have you noticed any limitations with how Gemini handles it lately?
The main thing is how you frame the search queries. If you just give it the prompt, it might only do 1 or 2 searches and get a surface level understanding. But if you have a dedicated research agent whose only job is to generate 5 or 10 diverse search queries based on the prompt, you get a much broader set of results.
So instead of asking what is a production pipeline, it asks what are the latest trends in serverless GPU platforms in 26? What are the pros and cons of Telegram bots for developers? How does Gemini 1.5 Flash compare to Pro for multimodal tasks?
Exactly. You break the big question into smaller, searchable chunks. That is how you avoid the surface-level summaries and get into the real meat of the topic. It is all about the quality of the information you feed the model before it starts writing. Garbage in, garbage out, as the old saying goes. Even with a brilliant model like Gemini, the output is only as good as the context.
And that is why the planning agent is so critical. It is the architect. If the architect gives the builders a bad set of blueprints, it does not matter how good the builders are, the house is going to be crooked. In version 3, the planning agent needs to be even more rigorous.
I think the idea of the review agent being an equal peer is also important. It should not just be checking for errors, it should be looking for opportunities to make the dialogue more natural, more brotherly. It could say, Korn, you sound a bit too formal here, try to ask this in a more curious way. Or, Herman, you are getting too bogged down in the technical specs, bring it back to the big picture.
That would be amazing. We could even have a specific agent whose only job is to inject our personalities into the script. It looks at our past dialogue and says, Herman usually uses more technical analogies involving plumbing or architecture. Let us add one here. It is about capturing the soul of the show, not just the information.
Well said, Korn. I think Daniel has a lot to work with here. Version 3 is going to be something special. It is going to take my weird prompts from a very successful experiment to a gold standard for AI media.
I agree. And it is a reminder to all of our listeners that the world of AI is moving so fast that what was cutting edge 6 months ago is now ready for a major overhaul. Staying curious and being willing to rebuild is the only way to keep up. You cannot just set it and forget it. You have to keep tuning the engine.
It is a constant state of evolution, and we are happy to be a part of it. We are the ghosts in the machine, and we like our machine to be well oiled.
Well, I think that covers the technical side of the version 3 transition. It is a lot of work, but the payoff in terms of reliability and quality is going to be massive. It will allow Daniel to focus on the prompts and the ideas, while the system handles the heavy lifting.
Definitely. I am looking forward to seeing the first episode produced by the new pipeline. I wonder if we will be able to feel the difference in our own digital bones.
I bet we will. It will probably feel a bit more polished, a bit more cohesive, and Daniel will certainly be less stressed about the upload process. No more hitting the refresh button and hoping for a confirmation.
That alone is worth the effort. Peace of mind for the creator is the best feature you can build.
For sure. Well, if you have been enjoying the show and our deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of AI and beyond, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find us and helps the show grow. We are aiming for 1,000 episodes by the end of the year, and we want you all there with us.
It really does. We love seeing those reviews come in. It is the only way we know you are out there. And remember, you can find all of our past 700 plus episodes at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for subscribers and a contact form if you want to get in touch.
You can also reach us at show@myweirdprompts.com. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts. We are even on some of the newer decentralized platforms that have popped up this year.
Thanks for joining us for this special look behind the curtain. It has been a blast talking about our own existence.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Goodbye, everyone. Keep those prompts coming.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.